Dear viewers, thank you for joining us. You're watching our weekly program, Talk to OBN on OBN Horn of Africa. In this segment today, we're going to discuss about the visit of U.S. Secretary of State Antonio Blinken to Ethiopia. He's been here lately, and I joined by Dr. Brahanu Lengiso for his expertise. First of all, thank you for joining me, Dr. Brahanu.
Thank you very much for having me at this show.
All right, let me directly go to my question. What is your take on the visit of, U.S. Secretary of State Antonio Blinken lately here?
Thank you very much. It is nice to talk to you again. I think the objective of the visit by the Secretary of State Antonio Blinken is relatively very clear this time. As he stated himself, it is to strengthen the tie between Ethiopia and the U.S. in particular, and generally because he's also visiting other African countries to increase, the strength is the tie between the U.S. and Africa in general. So that is pretty much straightforward, that the U.S. want to have a strong relationship with.
Okay. Antonio Blinken tweeted saying that his government is keenly working to boost up the ever-existed relationship between Ethiopia and the U.S., though we've seen a sort of, cold relationship over the past couple of years. What is your take on again?
Yes, that's very important. As we all know, the U.S.-Ethiopian relation is a very seasoned relation that the two countries have enjoyed about 120 years diplomatic relation. Although the diplomatic relation between the two countries, as I mentioned, is a very seasoned one, over a century-old relationship, it wasn't really smooth and solid. It actually fluctuated with regimes, and the U.S. support is one regime, then automatically the regime that overthrows that regime will enjoy a relatively cold relation. So we also had a similar experience over the last 2-3 years. If we look at briefly the history of diplomatic tie between Ethiopia and the U.S., it started in 1903, where Robert Skinner came to Ethiopia and had a meeting with King Menelik for about 9 days, and after that, it was this relationship was augmented with a treaty in 1929. So
that was during the reign of Theodore Roosevelt, right?
Yes, under President Roosevelt. And the two countries actually enjoyed a very good relationship until the 1930s, when Hitler invaded Ethiopia. Then the U.S. has to close its consulate in Addis Ababa because the U.S. didn't approve the invasion of Ethiopia by Hitler. Then they came back after the Italians left in 1943, and the tie between the two countries were relatively very strong after the Second World War, because Ethiopia actually took a very active role in global affairs in general after the Second World War. Then this relation cooled down with the overthrow of the imperial regime, because the Derg regime took side with the international communist bloc. But again, in 1991, with the downfall of Derg, the relationship between the US and Ethiopia improved dramatically, especially on matters related to regional stability and war of terror in the Horn of Africa. After the transition in 2018, again, the relationship between Ethiopia and the US were in some sort of confusion, to put it probably in that way, because the diaspora, for example, based in the US, were strongly supporting the transition, and the US government was on some sort of pause, like they didn't come out to either support or oppose the transition, because this also has to do with the peace agreement with Eritrea, with the Nobel Peace Prize, with Nile issues. There are a lot of issues on the table. So the previous president of the United States, Donald Trump, were making statements. Some of them were actually rude, especially in relation to the dam and in relation to the Nobel Peace Prize. And they also have their own internal issues. So it wasn't really that clear what type of position the US took with Ethiopia. But with the outbreak of the conflict in the northern part of the country, the United States start to put pressure on Ethiopia, including sanctions, like, for example, banning Ethiopia from AGWA, and with all this, the relationship between the two countries were relatively sour. But it wasn't only this time. So we had this kind of ups and downs in our bilateral relation over the last 120 years. So this time, I think the objective of the visit by the Secretary of State Antonio Blinken was, as it also was stated in his statement, is to improve the relation between the two countries, especially to increase economic support, to improve the peace situation in the country, and to support conflict and drone affected areas in Ethiopia.
Obviously, the US government used to pressurize the Ethiopian federal government so far. But now we've seen a promising move from the side of the US government. And this visit is a good indicator of positive diplomatic relationship between the two nations. Why, this time, the US government chose to have a strong relationship with the Ethiopian government, and why it failed to support the incumbent leadership over the past 4 years?
Well, it's not very easy and straightforward to answer those questions, because every country actually cultivates its own interest in foreign countries. So the US has its own objective why it is supporting a given government or opposing a given government. But when it comes to Ethiopia, Ethiopia is a very, very strategic country for the US because of the role that it plays in this part of the world, which is a very, very strategic part of the world. This Horn of Africa where actually the US and many other Western countries have interest, very particular interest related to trade, related to marine power, related to war on terror, related to oil. You can name many other, but so Ethiopia is a very, very strategic country for the US. So it is very important for the US to have that strong relationship. They have been doing this for many years. They support governments that works with them closely. And, it is obvious that they oppose governments that are not in a position to work closely with them. So the same happened now. Our relations have soared after the transition because it wasn't easy to figure out, but this time probably they are convinced that it is possible to work closely with this government. They can support, the changes in this country, support the Ethiopian people. They can also cultivate their own interest without pushing the interest of the Ethiopian people. So that's what I understand. It's a very strategic country for them. It is very important for them to work with Ethiopia. It is very important for them to work with the government of Ethiopia. So smoothing out the relationship between the two countries, between the two governments, is, I think, the right diplomatic direction for any country to take.
Okay. Again, due to the conflict in the north, the US government used to give a cold shoulder to the federal government and entertaining pressure, economic pressure all over again, and putting sanctions, economic sanctions mainly, among others, the AGOA privilege was the one, and Ethiopia has been banned from taking part in AGOA market. So this relationship, the current visit would expected to elevate or to make Ethiopia part of the AGOA roster. What's your comments, Joe?
Well, they have preconditions that they set, and they removed Ethiopia from AGOA based on that precondition they set. And as the Secretary of State said, now Ethiopia is on the right track to be back on that benefit. So that's a very good gesture. It's not only to put us on AGOA, but the effort of the government to ensure peace in the country is very important. So I think if we have that for us, if we can ensure peace in the country, if we can resolve problems, disagreement is peacefully, then the rest will follow. And the Secretary of State, Antonio Blinken, was, I think, very clear on that Ethiopia is on the right track to be back on AGOA. But as I said earlier, since the US government was enjoying a very good relationship with the previous regime, it wasn't easy to smooth out similar kind of relationship with the new government, the transitional government. That also happened in our history a number of times, that the US government had a very good relationship with the imperial government, but it wasn't easy for the US government to have similar kind of smooth relationship with Derg. And then they had a very good relationship with a government that overthrow Derg. It takes that kind of trajectory. Since we don't have, we are not lucky to have that smooth power transition in this country, that the next government has to overthrow the previous by force, then because of their own internal principles, it is not that easy for the U.S. government to get along with governments that come to power by overthrowing the previous government. So this time too, although we had, luckily we had a relatively more smooth kind of transition this time, because of the conflict that followed, we couldn't manage to, have that a smooth relationship. But the good part now is that we are smoothing it out, that we are fixing disagreements both internally and externally. And the position that the US is taking right now in encouraging the government and other parties in conflict to resolve issues peacefully, and then as an encouragement and as an incentive, bringing those privileges back is a very good step. So it will help us to both solve our internal problems, but also give us that privilege or benefit that we will get from arrangements like AGUA.
You've said, the U.S. government used to enjoy the relationship, its relationship with, with the previous regime, in entertaining its geopolitical interest or its national interest here in Ethiopia. Among others, the U.S. government knowingly disdain the justifiable reason of Ethiopia in claiming its own right on this grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. For instance, we remember what President Donald Trump has said about the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, just to favor Egypt and its previous allies. And now we're seeing a new status quo, a new paradigm shift upon this visit. In conjunction with this, Arab League recently showed one-sided support to Egypt upon the filling of the fourth round of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Do you think this, the current visit of Antonio Blinken would underweigh what the Arab League intended to do in relation to Egypt's interest on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam? You got my point, right?
Well, yes. Well, maybe yes, but the Arab League has put out a resolution, which is actually a funny resolution for me. And what is very striking for me is the answer that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs gave them. That was the right answer. So we don't need to go into that discussion further, because that is, for me, is a complete answer. But the Arab League has also been putting those statements before. Some of those statements are not really to any standard, and I don't see the purpose of putting those statements out now and then. As you said, the former president of the United States of America, Donald Trump, also said something like Egypt will bomb the dam. But all these are, I think, they miss the context, that the president failed to understand what this dam is all about and how Ethiopians are approaching it. This is a very unique project. This is a national flag project. that Ethiopians have contributed from their pocket to have this dam. So Ethiopians are ready to protect it, or Ethiopians are very committed to this project. Not necessarily the dam that is under construction on the river, but on the idea of having this, on the idea of using resource when we are capable to do so. So it is a bit, I mean, not only to the president and Arab League, but many other global institutions, including the Security Council, were wrongly approaching this project. But Ethiopians on the other side are very committed, and they are very clear, and they are very determined to have this. So I don't think there is any force that stops Ethiopia and the Ethiopians from having this kind of project in the future. So relatively, countries, including Egypt, Sudan, and the United States, many other organizations are getting better understanding of what this dam is all about, and the only option left now is to discuss in a very peaceful way about fair share or fair use of the water resource. Otherwise, this very traditional, very colonial mindset on that river is not going to bear any fruit.
A spokesperson of Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, Ambassador Meles Alem, briefed media saying this visit of Secretary of State Antonio Blinken is, I mean, it's a milestone move in U.S.-Ethiopia diplomacy. It is it's a new chapter for Ethiopia and the U.S. Diplomatic relationship. What does it mean by a new one?
It is not new in a literally term, but as I try to navigate through the history, the U.S.-Ethiopian relation history, there are these nodes, there are these nodes where a relationship a little bit cool down or a sort of breakdown, then get fixed. For example, you can take, the first juncture was in 1903 when the relationship first established in Addis Ababa, then signing the treaty, then again with the invasion of Italy, then there was a breakdown that the U.S. has to close its consulate in Addis Ababa. And then they came back in 1943, so they reopened. Although it is like reopening, but they are restarting the relationship. Again, with when after the DERB took over, then the relationship between Ethiopia and U.S., although they didn't close their embassy, it was relatively very cool. And again, with the downfall of Mengistu regime in 1991, the relationship within the two countries improved dramatically. That's like a kind of a new start, like with good, very new energy. And at this time again, we had a very cool relationship, sur relationship over the last 2-3 years. But this time the momentum is coming that the Ethiopian-U.S. relation is taking again the right trajectory that we are discussing to sort out things and to support each other to move forward together. Because this is not necessarily to benefit one or the other country, but the two countries, the diplomatic tie between the two countries is for one thing, a seasoned one, and the second, they need each other. They need each other. The U.S. need Ethiopia in this region, and Ethiopia need the U.S. for multiple reasons. So the mutual relation between the two countries is very important. So we are now again starting it, or at least improving that cold relationship between the two. So I don't think it is new in it is literally sense, but if we look at the trajectory, this kind of notes are there between on the relation between the two countries. So it is like refreshing it. It is like re-energizing it. It is strengthening it, as the Secretary of State himself stated.
The U.S. government, granted more than 331 million USD to Ethiopian government. Again, does this happen due to this new phase of diplomatic relationship, do you think?
Yes, of course. Again, the Secretary of State himself stated that he announced about 331 million US dollar to support, conflict in the drone affected areas. So this is a new gesture. This is showing that improving relationship, but that doesn't mean the U.S. weren't supporting Ethiopia over the last 2-3 years. The U.S. actually remain one of the biggest supporter over the last 2-3 years, even when we had that sort of kind of relationship at government level. They were committed to support people who need the support. But yes, we can take this as a new gesture toward that strengthening the relationship between the two countries.
Okay, apart from this visit, Vice President of the U.S. Kamala Harris said to visit some parts of Africa by the end of this month. The U.S. government is working more than ever to have a strong relationship with nations in Africa. Why it's so important for the U.S. this time?
It is because Africa as a continent is a very important continent. It is the future. It is the potential. So the U.S. government want to strengthen its ties with African nations and to have more engagement with the continent. It is also partly because in the U.S. internal foreign policy, there is this argument, a repeated argument, that other countries, including China, are overtaking Africa. So the U.S. want to engage more in Africa. The U.S. want to have a strong relationship with African nations, and they have been showing gestures toward that, including, for example, having a U.S.-African summit where many African leaders participated. And I think the visit by Vice President Harris is a follow-up on that U.S.-African leaders summit. Objective, I guess, is to strengthen again the relationship between the U.S. and African nations, as it is stated. And this speaks to the fact that Africa is a very important continent, the future of the world. and everybody want to have strong engagement, a strong relation, and a strong diplomatic tie. That is what I read from this very repeated visit from the US leaders lately.
Dr. Brahanu Lengiso, State Minister of Irrigation Development and political commentator, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. It's good to speak to you.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Dear viewers, once again, thank you for joining us. This brings you to the end of our edition for today. See you next time with another edition. Bye-bye.